I'm going to read for you now a piece about a Killavil man. His name was Martin Brennan. He was born in 1863, but he was a man of multi-talented man, if you like. He was a poet, a school teacher, a musician. He was a contemporary of Michael Coleman's, and it is said that at his house was the first place Michael Coleman learned farewell to Erin. As you will see when I read this, he was a man who loved his family very much, and he was a man who cherished other people who had talent also. Martin Brennan was born at Fallish, Killavil in 1863. He received his early education at Killavil National School and later went to Dublin where he trained as a teacher. His first permanent teaching post was at Newcastle School, where he took up the appointment in 1900. He remained teaching there until he took over as principal at Killavil following the transfer of John Spellman in 1914. He is, however, best remembered in these parts as a poet, and down the years was a regular contributor of verse to the Sligo Champion, the Freeman's Journal. Although most of his finest poems have been lost or mislaid, we did happen to come across two items of his work which are included here. In 1944, the late Jack Keenan of Armaghan happened to be working on the Brennan farm, which had some time previously been sold to a new owner. The day came wet, so he sought shelter in the late master's dwelling house, which by this time had fallen into a state of dilapidation. Courtesy prompted him to sift through a box of old documents, some of which were scattered about on the floor. There he came across what he considered to be a real little masterpiece. The document was damp and barely despicable. He took it home, dried it to the fire, and had it copied onto fresh paper. From reading its contents, it is obvious that the young teacher was courting a beautiful girl, and she and he apparently had a little tiff, confirming once again the old adage that true love never runs smooth. And the learned suitor had successfully tried to win back her affection by screaming her these classical lines. Mariana Gra, sure I grieve to leave you, although it were but for a single day. The sun won't shine when I shall deceive you, but try to make you both glad and gay. It seems to me that your deep emotions are not so ardent as those of mine, for now as never my fondest notions are centred on thee and thine. Some time ago I only knew you as a gay wee lassie, quaint and droll, but now I feel I must offer to you the fondest passions of a simple soul. Yet for a time 'twill be goodbye, darling, till fate befriends us so that I can, with greatest fondest embrace, my darling, my true fond dear one, my Marianne. Well, the master eventually won the heart of his lady, who was none other than Marianne Scanlon of Bun. The couple, whose marriage was childless, enjoyed many years of wedded bliss. But as the ways of life, the glamour and affection which that marked the early years of their marriage faded away, and as time went by the pair became as rusted-looking as the rest of their contemporaries. The master's sister Kate, who was married to Philip O'Byrne, died after a prolonged illness, and a year and a half later his brother Richard died suddenly in New York. These bereavements had a marked effect on the genial school teacher, so much so that he became depressed and took the bounce of drinking. He died in July 1921, a confused and broken man. A short time before his death, he wrote this moving piece of elegy to the memory of his brother and sister. The widening gulf of years that yawns between shall not offence the loved ones that have been. From memory's page their impasse is still there, a contemplation, oh how sad affair. These lines are written to commemorate a brother Richard and a sister Kate, both snatched away ere half a span their scene. 'Tis therefore best to hold their memories green. 5 years have just elapsed since peerless Kate resigned this anxious being, sad to state, and Richard, disdained as he was to roam, gave up the ghost 3,000 miles from home. He in artistic iron work surpassed, while she in apt intelligence outclassed. Not artful training made these two excel, their gifts were natural and unique as well. Yet not to flaunt inherit gifts so rare, nor seek for public platitudes did they care. Their lot forbade this talent to display, for all too fleeing was their little stay. 'Tis singular that those who are endowed with intellect so far above the crowd are often prematurely called away, while the prodding multitudes are left to stay. The few who show predominance of mind, ignoring self, would benefit their kind, but gems of peerless may, like those we name, in earthly wealth they seldom largely stay. And so it was with Richard and with Kate, they lived and died too early and too late, and often are like all such gone before, appreciated when they are no more. 'Tis true that others are, and yet will be, with genius blessed in varying degrees, and few, if any, can or will outshine those in whom in elegy we now combine. The march of intellect may still ascend throughout the ages till creation's end, and none more bright appears at any date than Richard Brennan and his dear sister Kate. Above poem courteously was given by Miss Winnie Brennan, whose late husband Dick was a cousin of the poet. I am about to read another piece from a little book called Killavil and Its People, written by a local historian who has lived all his life in Killavil on a small farm and who was fascinated by the stories of his childhood. It is a great honour to do this here at Coleman Memorial. This memorial, erected some 16 years ago to the memory of Michael Coleman by the Coleman Traditional Society, here in the half parish of Killavil. We're standing about 50 yards from his homestead where he was born and reared. Sadly, it remains roofless now, but the remains of the home are still there, a traditional west of Ireland abode, a 3-room thatched cottage. This little article on Coleman deals with his childhood, and it deals with some experiences he's supposed to have had. But it is a long way back, and nobody can confirm these are only what we call part of folklore. Because of the legacy of music he left on the face and back of his 78 records, Michael Coleman will forever remain in the hearts and minds of the people from whose ranks he came, their most cherished son. Many legends are associated with the great artist and his music that have not yet come to light. We are all aware that he dwelt in an area that was steeped in traditional music, and as was the custom in his day, nightly sessions were usually held at different venues each night. Michael's house for that all-important session was Johnny Hunt's at the back of Killavil Church. Johnny had 3 daughters, and like Coleman, each were learning to play the fiddle. As so often happens within the realms of the arts, one emerges that wee bit better than the rest. In this case, it was the youngest sister Nora who was coming to the fore, and it was she who nearly always joined in for a tune with Coleman. Throughout those years prior to his departure for America, she remained his favourite partner. Michael's other brother Jim, who was also becoming an accomplished fiddle player, used to accompany him on the sessions at night time. The brothers, when travelling to Hunts, often took an ear-cut by entering a by-road at Knocknaghee, and then following a direct route to the destination. Jim Coleman had an extraordinary story to tell about an incident that happened one night while returning from a session at Hunts. It was on a night in late October when the brothers set out for home. The time was well after midnight when they crossed the road and headed over into the fields in the direction of Knocknaghee. According to his story, the night was by no means dark, and yet before reaching Knocknaghee they lost their way. After moving it round in circles for a time, they suddenly entered a beautiful garden with trees and paddocks, which was the luscious they had ever seen. There was a peaceful atmosphere about the place. Everything was calm and serene. Far from being frightened by their mysterious surroundings, the brothers experienced a feeling of complete happiness. They kept on walking about, but what struck them at first as being a garden later turned out to be a vast landscape, and they saw flocks of sheep grazing away in the distance. They eventually grew tired from walking, so when a boulder of a stone presented itself as a suitable resting place, both boys sat down to ease their aching feet. Jim was carrying under his arm an old fiddle that belonged to his father, who had given stern instructions to bring it back safely. The odd thing about their predicament was the feeling of contentment that came over them, not a care in the world or a thought about home. Michael asked his brother for the fiddle, and he immediately obliged. It was already tuned, as this had been done at Hunts by an old fiddler named Gorman, who was an expert at the job. Michael began to play. The music echoed across the beautiful plains, and the rhythm of each note returned again and again, sounding like nothing that had ever occurred upon this earth. Overwhelmed and enchanted, the brothers lapsed into a kind of sensation, experienced while under the influence of a powerful drug. Then, just as quickly as it came about, the manifestation ended. The whole atmosphere drifted away like a fog, and they visibly saw Davy's house at Knocknaghee away in the distance. It was only when they found themselves back in reality again that fear took the place of joy. They headed straight for home and discovered to their amazement when they got there that it was just 1 hour since they had left Hunt's. Jim concluded that the mysterious happenings of the night had lasted for not more than 20 minutes, although they were under the impression that it had gone on for several hours. This experience had left Jim in a terrible fear of the night, and he never wanted to travel alone once darkness had fallen. He revealed details of the incident to very few people, and when he did venture to mention it, it was done with great sincerity. Michael was never known to have said anything about it. Now we'll come to the most interesting part of all. When the Coleman brothers appeared back for their session at Hunt's some time later, it was noted that their style of playing had improved out of all proportion. Now it rests with the reader to draw his or her conclusion from the matter. There is positive proof that Jim Coleman told the story with great sincerity. There are people still around who will vouch for the fact that he always had a terrible fear of the night. Was the whole thing a ridiculous concoction? The vast majority will probably believe it is. Yet there are many who, on listening to Coleman's music, will be convinced that it has a quality about it that is far removed from the realities of this world. Let's relax for a couple of moments and listen to him play Bonnie Kate and Jenny's Chickens. Aren't we at once carried away into that same world of enchantment supposed to be witnessed by the brothers on that extraordinary night? We would love if the tune went on forever, so great is the feeling it arouses within us. Jim, we are told, could play every bit as good as his brother. His talents were to a great extent wasted, due to the fact that he stayed at home in this backward land. The question to be answered here is, were the brothers touched by a spirit of genius on that particular night? Or is it just another riddle of the universe that leaves us forever curiously scratching the surface? Nora Hunt, who became Mrs. Nora O'Gara, survived her illustrious partner for almost 30 years. In the 1950s and 60s, she gave many fine performances in the old Cayley House in Killavil. On one night during a concert, Father O'Hara introduced her on stage as a great living link with the past, the woman who played with Michael Coleman. It is in every sense of the phrase a description befitting the artist, and only the great priest himself could have couched it in such glowing terms. As you will see underneath here, there is a picture of Mrs. O'Gara with Peter Horton and many others that was taken in the Killavil Cayley House in the late 1950s. And Paddy McSharry is included there, father of Ray, finance minister, Mrs. O'Gara, Deirdre Collis from Collooney, Peter Horton, Fred Finn, John Joe Mooney, and a number of other musicians. I am about to read an article now, written by a Leaving Certificate student of 17 years old. Her name is Fiona Rogers of Ballymote, and I think it is more than encouraging to think that a young girl of 17 years chose Michael Coleman for a subject in the Leaving Certificate, that such interest is yet being shown in this amazing artist. I think when we look at the writing of his own history and that of his parents, that it is encouraging to all of us to remember that in this little half parish we produced a musical son that will have a meaning for all of us as the years go on. I will start. A period of 97 years has passed since the birth of renowned Sligo fiddle player Michael Coleman. It is believed that this great fiddle player is a descendant of the Coleman family, thought to be of Ulster stock, which settled at Killandra, Ballahadreen, about 1840. His grandfather later settled in the Killavil townland of Knockgrania. Michael Coleman was the second son of lime burner James A. Coleman and his wife Ellen, formerly Ellen Gorman. He attended Killavil National School, where his teachers at the time were John Lavin and Patrick Benson. His name can still be found in the old roll book, which has been preserved in the schoolhouse over the years. Michael's father was a flute player, but it was the famous travelling piper Johnny Gorman who influenced the young Coleman. The great John O'Dowd was known to say that Michael Coleman could completely play for step dancers at the age of 5 years. A little known fact about him is that he held the senior Connacht championship for step dancing for 4 consecutive years. His dancing teacher at the time was a man named Tue, who travelled around from place to place. It is also said that Coleman could step dance while playing the fiddle. Before his immigration to the United States, Coleman spent most of his life playing music at the country house dances. They took place practically every night at Patrick Curley's of Killavil, which was only 2 miles from his own home. He could be seen strolling down the road on a summer's evening with the fiddle tucked under his arm. It was in Curly's that he got the name for his two of his most popular tunes. According to locals, the story goes as follows. One summer's evening, Patrick Curly and Michael Coleman were having a session of music. He got Patrick Curly to play two tunes over and over again until he had mastered them. Michael asked him what he would call them. At that moment, Patrick Curly's little girl called Kate came in the door. She was followed by a hen and a clutch of chickens, and she was calling Jenny, Jenny to the hen. With that, Coleman said, "We will call them Bonnie Kate and Jenny's chickens." When he was 18 years of age, Coleman immigrated to England, where he remained for a time working as a barman. And it was here he made his first recordings. He later sailed for the US, settled in New York, but soon became restless and joined Kenneth's theatre circuit. With this group he toured the principal American cities and captivated his audience with his renderings of the Irish traditional music on the violin. After a few years on tour, Coleman returned to New York and became one of the most popular artists in the Irish dance halls and country clubs in that city. For many, his beautiful renderings of traditional airs was the only link with their homeland. It is interesting to note that one of his most popular pieces was McDermott's Hornpipe, a tune taught to him as a boy by the late P.J. McDermott of Brennan, County Sligo. Unfortunately, despite many efforts and inquiries, I have been unable to acquire a recording of this piece. Michael Coleman was a man of low stature and quiet disposition. During his years in the States, he could rarely boast of having steady employment. By 1920, he was married, and more often than not, he depended on the fluctuating income he got from his recordings as a sole means of livelihood. This gifted artist sometimes played at important functions on a violin borrowed from a friend. Coleman had many friends in New York, including a number of accomplished fiddle players from the home country, Paddy Killordan, John Dowd and Tom Morrison. Coleman was a unique artist. He could blend the joyous nature of our native music with the masterly control of his instrument. One of his most amazing accomplishments was his ability to play a tune backwards, starting with the last note and finishing with the first. However, his real genius lay in the gift for dressing tunes. Some claim that he never played the same way twice. His amazing musical ability received special recognition, and he was given long contracts in New York, Boston and Philadelphia. Coleman's artistry brought his letters of admiration from the celebrated Fitzchrysler and the renowned Moshe Elam. The latter, searching for the greatest compliment he could pay Coleman, called him Ireland's Chrysler of the violin. Chrysler, in turn, is reported to have stated that he would not attempt music Coleman played if he practiced for 1,000 years. The Columbia and Viola broadcasting companies and the Decca Recording Company vied with each other in distributing Coleman's dance tunes throughout America and beyond. His best-known recordings were Bonnie Kate, Lord Gordon's Reel, The Green Fields of America, The Temple House Reel, The Duke of Leinster, O'Dowd's Favourite, Fergal O'Gara's Reel, The Grey Goose, The Morning Dew and The Boys of the Law. A number of his recordings have recently been reissued. Coleman's recordings were cherished wherever Irish musicians gathered. Their immediate effect was to stimulate interest in traditional music. Coleman's standard of playing was so high and his artistry so inspiring that all musicians of varying standards suddenly found motivation to aspire to greater heights. Another result of Coleman's influence was the birth of what may be described as the modern pan-Irish style of fiddling. Of several influential recording artists, it was Coleman whose music found widest acceptance, not only throughout Ireland, but with the varying Irish fiddlers of the United States and Canada as well. Many Irish fiddlers imitated Coleman, so that his stylistic trends, characteristic of the Sligo style of the Sligo area, began to appear everywhere. Coleman's importance as an artist and a cultural ambassador goes beyond the effect of his music. Coleman's importance as an artist and a cultural ambassador goes beyond the effect his music had on the style and repertoire of traditional Irish music. Coleman elevated to a level of interest that justified the serious attention of a listening audience by achieving a concert level of performance. Michael Coleman died in New York on the 4th of January 1945. Age 53, at Knockwicker Hospital, and is buried in St. Roman's Cemetery in the Bronx. In his relatively short life, he completely altered the concept of Irish folk music. By his skill and ability, he could transform a native and simple tune into a first-class masterpiece. full of variety and rhythm. If ever a musician deserved the title legend, it is the Sligo fiddle player Michael Coleman. In September 1974, through the efforts of the Coleman Traditional Society, a memorial to honour him was unveiled in Gurchin, not far from his birthplace. The unveiling ceremony was performed by James Brennan, a personal friend of Coleman, with whom he often played in concert in the United States. The monument consists of a large upright slab flanked by two lower ones. On the large slab it is the engraving of the fiddle and the words "To the memory of Michael Coleman, master of the fiddle, saviour of Irish traditional music, born near this spot in 1892, died in exile in 1945. Underneath the main inscription is an engraving of a harp, signifying Irish culture, standing on the road of time. The sun is dawning over the mountain, and there is a chain with broken links to indicate freedom from bondage. The slab on the left side, as one faces the monument, is dedicated as follows: to the traditional musicians of an older generation who in this area inspired his genius, and on the right slab, to those of a later generation who after his passing fostered and preserved that tradition for posterity. Michael Coleman lived in a traditional west of Ireland abode. A three-room whitewashed cottage, Coleman's Cottage as it was known locally, is situated at a crossroads, and Coleman's Cross became a place of congregation for local musicians. Travelling players frequented the home, brought there by the lilting strains. Older members of that community recall that musical activity was so abundant there that the house was dubbed James E. Coleman's Musical Hall. Michael's father, James Coleman, was also an extraordinary fiddler and had a bowing technique much like that of his son. That concludes the article, and I think it was most appropriate to read it here because we are standing right behind the memorial, and I think the young writer has given a very ample description of the words and their meaning. Again, as I say, particularly pointing towards the harp, with the chain links are broken, our freedom from bondage. I think it was a great and appropriate piece to put there, because for 700 years we were suppressed, and as you can see, the harp stands on the road of time to indicate that we got freedom from bondage some years ago.